The recent event in Limbus Company had the main cast impart their life lessons to certain students. But this raises questions. Why those 12 out of the 13? Who are they really, beyond the characters we see? Who do they reference and what significance do they hold? Usually I would tackle these questions, yet today I want to explore what I know about some of the characters, and most importantly why I think one sinner was deliberately left out, why they were not given the title of a master. On the surface, it could have been just a random decision made by the game's developers. However, I have solid reasons to believe this is not true. For example, the 12 teachers did not have as much attention given to them as the student. So this means that they were chosen deliberately. Maybe they were chosen because the writers liked this character more than the others. However, usually Limbus Company's writing has more depth than this. Dante serves as our anchor in the story, and we experience the game through his lens. In this way, he is largely passive, rarely taking the spotlight. And out of the others, out of the 12, only one that was left out is also like this. Sinclair did not receive the title of a master. Meanwhile, the rest had something important to teach. Isang taught the importance of self-reflection, of course. Gregor shared insights about urban and trench warfare, and Otis had to impart knowledge on extracting information and interrogation tactics. Each lesson ties directly to the sinner's backstory. So why was Sinclair positioned as a student rather than a master? If every other character had some development throughout their Canto, and they became better people or they overcame their past, why is Sinclair still a student instead of a teacher?
You are on this council, but we do not grant you the rank of master.
What? How can you do this? This is outrageous.
Well, unlike the others, Sinclair joined the company with no real experience. He is the youngest member of LCB, and this is his very first job, an unfortunately brutal one. Imagine your first job being unpaid labor dealing with horrors beyond comprehension. But Sinclair is not just a regular teenager, he bears the mark of Cain, or the sign, and with it the potential to become one of, if not the strongest sinner. Yet that potential is not realized, at least not yet. And there is a reason for that. Well, I've been avoiding the direct answer, and I've been dragging on this video for quite long, so I want to go on a tangent. In serialized media, gacha game, anime, manga or TV series, some degree of status quo must be maintained. Otherwise, the story ends, and that is the last thing the company wants. For example, I right now do not wish to end this video until I hit at least 10 minutes. To keep a narrative alive, many stories escalate threats, from city level to country level to planet level, and so on. Think of Naruto, for example, where kunai-wielding ninjas were once dangerous, but later villains were near godlike beings who could obliterate nations. TV shows likewise raise personal drama, and they do this to keep audiences invested. Without change, expectation, or ambiguity, a story stagnates. Project Moon avoids falling into cliches, but they rely on status quo to sustain the game. Limbus Company's formula is simple. Spotlight one sinner, explore their past, acquire the golden bow linked to them, and leave some threads unresolved. This structure allows for character growth without exhausting the story. Each canto finishes a chapter in a sinner's arc, redefines them for the audience, and leaves ambiguity for future development. But earlier Cantos were not exactly perfect. They did not have the balance between character development and ambiguity. Some later Cantos have completely broken down and rebuilt characters, giving them tremendous depth. For example, Heathcliff was one such character, and Don Quixote another. By contrast, the few first Cantos left more to be desired. Rodion and Gregor in particular suffered from this. Their stories ended abruptly. As the developers later addressed Rodion in Time Killing Time event, and now it seems it was Sinclair's turn. Still, Rodion and Gregor were not left out. Their stories were still concluded enough. See, there was a lot of ambiguity in what could have been and where the plot could go. However, as characters, they are very well defined. They have already embraced who they are as people, and thus there is not much room for growth there. And with Sinclair, it's simply different. Let's focus on Sinclair and his Canto. There is a consensus among fans that the game truly begins with Canto 3. Sure, Cantos 1 and 2 were bleak, dark, and relatively straightforward, but they were nothing compared to the visceral, brutally direct experience of Sinclair's homecoming. The prodigal son did not return to a warm embrace. Instead, he found his family's mangled, impaled bodies displayed in front of his burning manor. Everything and everyone he once held dear was gone, and it was all but his fault. This massacre was architected by none other than Kromer, whose whistling in the background created a haunting scene, with the audio design amplifying the horror. Canto 3 wasn't just brutal, it forced us to confront what it means for a sinner to return to their roots. Sinclair's homecoming was not a triumph, but a descent into personal hell. He is often symbolized as an egg, unhatched, fragile, waiting to break. He has not yet emerged into adulthood or selfhood. This is why his development matters. In nature, indecision and inaction often mean death. Sinclair's inability to act, to speak, to assert himself created the inferno he witnessed in K-Corp. The mark of Cain, or the sign, a red scar that appears on his forehead when he embraces his identity, visualizes his duality. On the surface, Sinclair is calm and soft, but beneath lies anger, aggression, and the capacity for violence. That's why so many characters push him to break his shell. None more so desperately than Kromer, who wanted him to embrace his murderous potential. In one mirror world where she won, Sinclair bears the mark clearly, killing with tears streaming down his face. A bird may break out of its egg from within or be broken from without. Sinclair's unhappiness in this alternate path stems from his identity being forced upon him, rather than being chosen. When the mark appears naturally, it signifies him being true to himself. But what even is the mark? The sign is a miraculous mark engraved on the forehead, denoting someone as special. It is invisible to the most, sometimes even to its bearer. Those who bear it can perceive it in others. Sinclair could vaguely see it on Damien before realizing his own mark. Curiously, the mark closely resembles the mark of Cain from Supernatural, and may serve a similar purpose, signifying the power of murder. This is why Sinclair's incomplete embrace of the sign is significant. Unlike the other sinners who have already crossed their point of no return, Sinclair remains in limbo, between innocence and experience. Cantos 3 gave him more development than Cantos 1 and 2 combined gave to their respective sinners, but Sinclair is still an unfinished product. At the very moment he seemed ready to embrace his identity fully, with the mark shining on his forehead. That final transformation was unfortunately or fortunately denied from him, from us. Intervention by others preserved his innocence, leaving him a bird unhatched, still bound within the egg. The conclusion of Canto 3 left a lot to desire. The writers excluding Sinclair from the 12 Masters isn't an oversight, it's intentional. Sinclair represents the unformed, the still learning. He is not there to teach, but absorb. He embodies the uncertainty and instability that Dante, and by extension, we must help guide. In this sense, Sinclair is Dante's mirror. Both are passive, reactive figures, swept along by forces greater than themselves. Both must endure, reflect, and eventually transform. This is why the status quo matters. Project Moon cannot allow Sinclair to fulfill his potential too early. To do so would end his arc before its time. Instead, he remains ambiguous, Cain, but yet not Abel's killer. He is in this unfinished state, and that makes him compelling, because Limbus Company is a story about growth through suffering, and no other character embodies growth more than Sinclair. And this ties back to the Divine Comedy. In Dante's Inferno, not every figure he meets is a teacher. Some are simply souls reflecting damnation, salvation, or regret. Sinclair functions in the same way. He is not yet Virgil, nor Aeschylus who has mastered his fate. He is still stumbling through his own circle of hell, and in watching him stumble, we confront what it means to be in progress, to live without answers. So when we ask why was Sinclair left out, the answer is that he wasn't left out at all. He was set aside. Some lessons cannot be taught by a master. They have to be lived through a student.